The internet is cracked, the show that asks the question, can we coexist with our creation?
Hi, I'm Seth Camillo.
And I am Caroline Risberg, and we are The Internet is Cracked by Addicts for Addicts.
And today we are very, very lucky to have Professor Kembrew McLeod, who is not only a professor, he is a writer, he's an activist, he is a filmmaker, and he is a scholar. And I have to emphasize the filmmaking part because I think Caroline and I both rewatched
Yeah, we did.
Copyright Criminals last
It's
night,
great.
which is kind of the perfect documentary in that it is completely entertaining and you feel like you're an expert at the end of it. So
Great.
it,
That's so funny, actually. I have a senior capstone class
yeah,
that I showed it to. And, they're, 19, 21, 20, 21 years old. And they all seemed really engaged. It's funny because it's like a historical documentary, even though it's dealing with stuff that happened in the 1990s.
yeah, no,
But to them, it is
Yeah.
historical.
well, the fundamental ideas still are important and relevant, and that's what I actually wanted to start the interview off with is how has the internet affected remix culture and maybe art in general, in your opinion?
Well, I think that, previous to the emergence of the internet, the idea of remix culture, the idea of sound collage was a much more esoteric activity. It was something that appealed to, within like the kind of underground music worlds. Like it was known only to like a handful of people who are fans of the group, let's say Negative Land or the Tape Beatles, who are actually from Iowa City, where I live. And fast forward to today, um, uh, you know, m- my college students, they're walking around with phones and tablets in their backpacks that basically enable them to uh, basically do the sorts of remixing that was only available to, either the kind of underground DIY remixers like Negative Land or hip hop artists who had access to, recording studios that were not accessible because of the costs of those recording studios to rent them.
I want to know what the tools the internet has brought us, like having GarageBand on your phone
Mhm.
and in your pocket having a camera that's better than anything I used when I was a graduate student, well, video camera wise.
Mhm.
Um, how have you seen that change art in general?
Really, the exciting thing about this is that it has enabled consumers to become producers. Uh,
Hmm.
so it's it's enabled people to, tap into the kinds of creativity that they wouldn't necessarily have access to because they didn't have the money or they didn't live in a city that had a recording studio with digital samplers, MIDI systems, or whatever. Digital technologies have democratized creativity, and the internet specifically has democratized the ability to circulate, distribute people's creations. And so, if someone had told me that this would be possible back in the 80s, that you could walk around with something in your pocket, a cell phone that can actually make music, uh, you know, it just would have sounded like science fiction almost to me. So it's been, I hesitate to use anything like the words revolutionary, but it really has created a kind of paradigm shift where, people who would default to become consumers are now, they at least have the toolkit to become producers.
Well, what do you think like AI have done or will do to the remix culture?
Well, I think the most exciting thing that AI can bring to the table is what's already happening, which is uh, AI tools that enable you to take a finished recording track and then pull apart each element of the song, or stems, as engineers call it. Um, And before these kinds of AI technologies, you needed to have access to the multi-track recording,
Mhm.
and now you don't. You can take a song that's been, you know, uh, published, that's been circulated on a CD or in whatever format, and you can pull apart like the bass line, the drums, the vocals, and you can isolate them. And that's really mind blowing. And in fact, I've seen it already take off because the availability on YouTube of acapellas and instrumental tracks for a lot of pop music songs, um, songs that were never released in just a cappella form or instrumental form, are now all over the place on YouTube. And I know this because I'm teaching a senior capstone class
Mm.
that involves remixing, and it's about remix culture. They're reading about it, but they're also using GarageBand currently to make mashups. Actually, the assignment was due today, so I'm looking forward to listening to them. I've already listened on their headphones to some of the things that people have been making, and it's really cool. And so, the one of the reasons why I uh, know about the impact of AI in this particular sector is because you didn't see the kinds of instrumentals and the kinds of a cappella vocals available on YouTube a year ago, let's say. And now you can pretty much find anything you want because people have already, used the AI software to pull out all the different stems, the different elements of songs. And so that's really exciting to me, actually.
My cousin is in the band The Feelies. I don't know if you've ever heard of them.
Oh, yeah, I'm a big fan.
Yeah. Well,
I have all their albums.
oh,
Seriously.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, that's
Brenda
great.
Slaughter, she's the bassist. And she tried out some of the AI music sites that create songs from a prompt, and she was absolutely horrified.
Mm.
And she said, where is musicality gonna go in 5
Mm.
years, 10 years?
And what horrified her about it, just the fact that the product of the
It was so
product that
good.
was prompted, oh, it was so good?
Yeah, it was so I
Mhm.
mean, it was,
Yeah.
it was so good. She was like, "Well, what's gonna happen in 10 years?"
Yeah. Wow, that's such a big question. I don't even think I have a good snappy answer for that. But, I'll just try and take the long view and sort of remind us and remind the listeners to take a breath and realize that humans have been adapting to new technologies, long before digital technologies were actually a thing. And, these new technologies have held the potential and have actually disrupted social life in various ways. But we humans tend to find ways of navigating, this. That said, AI is a whole nother ball of wax, and
Yeah.
perhaps perhaps these AI songs will supplant artists and musicians who would be the ones who create the melodies and the vocals. But I think that we're going to find a balance and a way of just using these technologies to extend our capabilities as creative humans rather than uh, basically being subservient to them.
Okay.
Yeah, I hope so. But would you think this is actually a question we had um, about the copyrights. So let's
Mhm.
say I'm putting in the AI, like I want a soulful song. I want you to write about my dog, and I
Mhm.
want this and this and that, and it comes out, and do I? And it sounds good, right? It's super good song.
Yeah.
And do I own it?
No, no, you don't, because the way that the United States copyright law is written is that there are a couple important factors. One, it has to rise to the level of creativity, like an originality
Mm.
to be creative, to be considered a creative work that can be copyrighted. Two, you have to be a human being to be able to own a copyright. So there is actually a case around monkeys or chimpanzees who base in the wild who were taught to take selfies by a photographer who left a camera, in the forest, let's say, and these the primates were like trained to push the button and take selfies, and the copyright the photographer tried to claim ownership of the copyrights, and essentially courts decided that if a human is not, you know, engaged in the actual creation of this particular photograph, then it's not copyrightable. So it has to rise to the level of originality, which I think an AI song would. Like, you put in
Right.
a prompt and it comes up with something original sounding, something new. So that part's good. But the important part is it needs to be created by a human. And
Needs
so you would not own it. And of course, I think the laws will soon be changing in reaction
Mhm.
to this because certain creators or industries are going to want to be able to control copyright and be able to copyright works that are generated at least in part by AI.
Well, I know there's a lot of AI created songs on Spotify that are earning money.
Yeah, we're in a wild, wild west era right now when it
Yeah.
comes to AI and copyright.
And I do know in South Africa was the only example of they gave a copyright to an AI.
Yes, South Africa. I was going to mention that. Yeah, the way the laws are written in South Africa, it's we would not be able to apply the same standards in the United
Okay.
States, for instance.
Yeah, even like when it comes to, let's say, art painting, I've heard a lot of people have been fighting about originality. If I paint or are using AI, if that's considered art.
I mean, I personally have a wide open, understanding of what art is. It's just, it's the residue of our existence as humans. And as humans who are interacting with machines and other technologies. But that's true, of especially if you think about the piano as a technology, which it is, or the
Mhm.
violin, uh, all the way up through the electric guitar, using amplification. I mean, we as creative human beings have been interacting with new technologies for, decades, centuries.
What about activism in the internet? I know you're an activist. How has the internet changed how how you go about being an activist? And has it changed?
Yeah, I mean, the kind of activism that I engage in is often what I refer to as prank activism, where, for instance, let me give a concrete example. My dissertation in the late 90s was on intellectual property law and the way that laws impact creativity and ideas of ownership and so on. So I thought it would be funny if I could try to trademark the phrase freedom of expression with the United States Patent and Trademark Office to and actually I successfully did, but only after it was initially rejected. But it wasn't rejected because the United States Patent and Trademark Office believed that um, you know, a single person owning the phrase freedom of expression and being able to control the contexts in which it's used is morally or ethically wrong. That wasn't the case. No, I just when I filled out the form, I didn't spell out freedom of expression in all cap letters, which was stated on the form, and I didn't notice that. So once I revised it, the application sailed through, and then I became owner of freedom of expression, at least within a class
Mhm.
16 materials in the international schedule of goods and materials according to the patent and trademark office, which basically means class 16 is print matters, publications, magazines. So I couldn't control someone using the phrase freedom of expression, let's say in a movie, but I could keep the ACLU from publishing a magazine titled Freedom of Expression, which was kind of hilarious in my mind. And that was it was a prank, it was a prank slash provocation that was intended to have people start conversations. Oh, hey, did you hear about the guy who trademarked the phrase freedom of expression? Wow, things have really gone that far. Uh, and and so early on, I think in 2003, I threatened to sue AT&T for using that phrase in a ad campaign.
Okay.
They used freedom of expression as the tagline for their mobile phone ad campaign, their cellular service. And I knew that all I have to do to generate a cease and desist letter is hire a lawyer. I paid, I think, $50 for the lawyer services to crank out, uh, um, a cease and desist letter from a boilerplate, which included hilarious language like, "This letter is a formal notice that you cease and desist immediately from all forms of freedom of expression." And the New York Times broke that story, and this was in the early, the internet was in full swing in terms of, uh, getting people access to information. So even though the New York Times broke the story, and it's a classic print publication, it really circulated through the internet. And AP wire services picked it up, and it became an international news story, where I played the kind of quasi corporate a-hole who, when I was interviewed by reporters, I would say things like, I spent too much time, money, and effort trademarking the phrase freedom of expression just to have anyone come along and think they can use it however they want, whenever they want. And so I was, playing the irony as a strategy, again, to kind of stir things up. And this was enabled by the internet. Like, the reason why it became a global news story is because, even in the early 21st century, the internet had pretty much entrenched itself into daily life, even if we didn't have social media
Right.
uh, apps on our phones. And so th- I wanted to use that as an example, one of many that activists like myself and other kind of prankster activists have used to kind of get attention, draw attention, and redirect it towards kind of like important social issues or semi-important social issues. I mean, freedom of expression is kind of a big deal, but
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but there are even higher stakes social issues which I wanted to recognize. And so the internet has enabled activists to basically has given them a megaphone that
Mm,
enables their small voices, quiet voices, relatively speaking, compared to, the major media industries, and it amplifies it. And so, yeah, that's one of the benefits of the existence of the internet in terms of the kinds of activism that I'm engaged in.
Which brings us to a question that Caroline and I both have been talking about, and it could be used for activism, for pranking, but media manipulation, the deep fakes,
Oh yeah.
oh,
and
yeah.
and vocal fakes, and all that stuff. I've seen it used in very creative ways, but it is very frightening.
I'm so glad that you asked that question because absolutely, it's a double-edged sword. Like, it holds a great amount of potential, but also, with deep fakes, deep fakes can sway an election, for instance.
Yeah.
But even like, again, kind of trying to take the historical long view and not see everything as a completely new social phenomenon. Like, in my book Pranksters, which I wrote it was published in 2014, so it's been 10 years, and it's just fuzzy memory now. But no, I mean, I remember good chunks of the book. But the one thing that really I still recall writing about is the concept of prank blowback. Even if you're trying to like fool audiences in order to educate them,
Mm,
sometimes that extra step of education gets lost once you lose control of the narrative, and once your prank has become, a worldwide circulating phenomenon. I'll use one example from my own personal experience. So one thing that I did in 2008, that's an example of prank blowback, is I confronted Bill Clinton when he was stumping for Hillary Clinton in Iowa City, and it was just Bill Clinton. And I had long been irritated with Bill Clinton because of this really kind of long, convoluted story about Sister Soldier. The quick version is Sister Soldier was a African American activist who was associated with the hip hop group Public Enemy, and she was asked by a L.A. Times reporter after the L.A. riots, in 1992, that when a white truck driver was taken out of his truck, who was driving through downtown LA, and he
Mm.
was severely beaten. And the reporter asked Sister Soldier to speak to the mindset of like a gang member or someone who would have done that. So she said, you know, if every day is like a day in which blacks are being killed on the streets, why not have a day where you kill white people? Again, like, and she was responding specifically to that question about,
Uh-huh.
please, speak to the mindset of someone who would have done that horrible act. And so she absolutely did not advocate that. She made that
Right.
clear. But Bill Clinton, when his campaign was struggling and it looked like he wouldn't get the nomination, the Democratic nomination in 1992, he, turned to the right and attacked Sister Souljah at Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition conference, where he singled her out and said, basically, it's horrible that you would call for Kill White People Week when that's not so that helped him
Mm.
and it helped his political career. He became president. So when he came to Iowa City, I wanted to help correct the record by calling him out for, and I dressed as a robot. Because I knew that if I was just a simple activist screaming at him among a sea of other human beings in the audience, apologize to Sister Soldier, it wouldn't have the ripple effects. But instead, I dressed as a robot and stood near where all the CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, CBS, ABC cameras
Yeah.
were. They all pivoted to me, where I said, "Apologize to Sister Soldier," and I'm dressed like a robot. And that was the strategy. Like that was the hook that I knew
Oh,
would
it's great.
circulate my critique of what Bill Clinton did with Sister Soldier, and to kind of show that he misled the American public for his own political gain. Sadly, because for instance, it took me just 2 minutes, 3 minutes to explain the context of this story just to you and your listeners. Um,
Yeah.
in the world of soundbite news
Mm.
television, um, uh, that kind of complexity and the nuance and all that stuff just totally got washed away. And so there was literally a CNN anchor who summarized who Sister Soldier was after they showed footage of me demanding that Bill Clinton apologize to Sister Soldier. They summarized who she was Sister Soldier was a black activist who called for a Kill White People Week, which Bill Clinton called racist. Which, like, so, and that's an
Oh,
example of prank blowback. In my attempt to
right.
correct the historical
Yeah.
record, I probably made things worse because most people
Right.
didn't even remember Sister Soldier. But if they, and so the only information they had to go on from CNN was Sister Soldier was a black activist who called for Kill White People Week, which she did not, which Bill
Right.
Clinton called racist. Sure, that's racist, but that didn't actually happen. So
That's
that's an
right.
example. That's a concrete example of what I call prank blowback. So fast forwarding to the present, and we're talking about AI and deep fakes and stuff. Yeah, all of these technologies and all of these strategies of activism are double-edged swords. They can be used for good and for evil. And even when you're trying to use them for good, you can end up getting blowback, unintended consequences.
What about the public domain? Ho- how is that grown or shrunk due to the internet? Is something I
Well, the public domain is a legal like concept which refers to works that cannot be uh, uh, works that either have either fallen out of copyright or could never be under copyright to begin with, or were too old and that preceded copyright laws,
Mhm.
such as Shakespeare. So the public domain is referring to, yeah, basically something that is not copyrighted currently or not even copyrightable. Um, and so the term public domain sometimes gets used more colloquially to refer to just like elements of culture that become really accessible, easily accessible to a wider population, via the internet, for instance. But like, so getting back to your question, the public domain has technically shrunk um,
Mm.
over the past 40 years because the terms of the lengths in which copyright terms kept getting extended. By the time the internet had emerged, the public domain had basically shrunk to the smallest that it had ever been because in 1998, there was the Sonny Bono Copyright Term Extension Act, which extended copyright for the life of the author plus 50 years to life of the author plus 70 years. And in the case of
Huh.
corporations, it was extending, I believe, from 75 years to 95 years, which is why it took so long for Mickey Mouse to go into the public domain. It only recently, in the past few years, did.
But in practice, like Caroline and I have made a trailer for our show, and it
Mhm.
is composed of video footage that we don't own.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so for all intents and purposes, I see a lot of people using footage they don't own. Um,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
much, much easier to get that now than it was, before the internet.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I wanted to distinguish between kind of the legal definition of public domain and the more colloquial way that public domain gets used, referring to just our access to this, vast database,
Yeah.
archive of materials, visual, audio, so on. And yeah, uh, and so in practice, what you're talking about isn't actually the public domain, but it's still, these materials that you don't own are, you're treating them as a kind of public domain.
Yes.
And so I think absolutely, most people who grew up as digital natives, my college students,
Mhm.
um, they, they do kind of take a view of culture in which they're thinking about it as a kind of public domain, as a shared resource.
There's a website where you can type in a quote and it will bring up that quote on from a movie, from
Mhm.
a film, a studio release film. And then you can use that on your Instagram reel or whatever, but that's completely illegal.
Yeah, although it could count as fair use. So one thing we haven't talked about so far is fair use, which is um, a, a statute that's uh, unique to the United States and a handful of other territories. So when we talk about fair use, it's really important to remind us that you know uh, these laws don't apply to people who are engaging in these borrowing practices in other territories and say Europe. Like in Europe, there's no such thing as fair use. But I haven't defined what fair use is, so let me just real
Yeah.
quickly. It's a statute that was written into the 1976 copyrights uh, law, which was the last big revamp of copyright law, which is pretty amazing to think about. It's been, almost a half century since the copyright law was overhauled. So the newest reproduction technology in 1976 was the photocopier.
Yeah.
So the law was not written with the internet in mind. It's been, been
Mm.
amended, but there hasn't been a rewrite since 76. And that 76 statute included the fair use statutes, which is an exception that allows for people to use, uh, you know, quotations, elements of copyrighted works for the purposes of education, for news, for parody, parody like, for instance, Two Live Crew, the foul-mouthed rap group, turned Roy Orbison's Pretty Woman song into Ugly Woman, and the Supreme Court ruled unanimously 9-0 that what Two Live Crew did when they took the bass line from the song and they took the basic hook of the original Pretty
Mhm.
Woman and turned it into Ugly Woman. They ruled that uh, Two Live Crew did not infringe on Roy Orbison's copyrights. It's only something that you can invoke once you've been sued, and copyright infringement lawsuits can be incredibly expensive. And
Mhm.
it basically comes down to which party has more money to waste in court, more money and time to waste in court as the clock ticks. And so people who have really strong fair use claims, uh, are probably not going to be able to defend themselves because they're not a corporation like Disney.
I have 3 times, had to get fair use certifications through law firms in order to get insurance on films, so
Oh yeah, yeah, I know. So imagine what I had to go through to get copyright
I
criminals
can't imagine.
Oh.
errors in. So there's this thing called errors and omissions insurance for films, for documentaries. In the case of documentaries, like it basically um, protects you and also the broadcaster. In my case, PBS. PBS aired Copyright Criminals on its Independent Lens series, and Copyright Criminals is a documentary that it's a history of hip hop digital
Mhm.
sampling and its collision with copyright law. And in order to tell that story, we had to play plenty of examples of
Mhm.
songs that had been sampled and the songs that sample those songs, and we used numerous just short video and audio quotations. In fact, I had a spreadsheet. I think it was about 400 uses of various songs in a 52-minute film. We had about
Mhm.
400 uses of other people's intellectual property, and working with the lawyer who Peter Yazzie, who's amazing. He helped us craft, or he wrote the fair use letter to the errors and omissions insurance that justified
Yeah,
each of those
yeah, yeah,
400 uses.
Wow.
yeah.
And it was it was the first time that Errors and Emissions Insurance Company had ever approved a film with that many fair uses.
Yeah, I can
And
ima
it, in fact, got kicked up to the head, like the lead counsel of that firm, who watched it and had two things to say. Oh, that was a really interesting film. And yeah, that does count as fair use. So that's how it ended up airing on PBS, because we were able to get errors and emissions insurance. But we had to justify 400 uses, essentially.
That's amazing.
And let me do like math real quick because, again, fair use is just something that allows you to defend yourself in court. And the statute, the copy, if you if you're found guilty of infringing on a copyright, you're liable for up to $250,000 per infringement. And so $250,000 times 400 is $100 million that I'm like
Oh, wow.
theoretically on the hook for, in terms of liability. So
Wow. Wow.
just to give you a sense of the stakes, and knock on wood, no one's ever come after us.
Oh,
I wanna ask you because you care so deeply about music, I know you do. What do you think about the streaming services in terms of the deals they've signed? I know, you know, not artist friendly is kind
No,
of
not at all. I
limits.
mean, it's
mm,
terrible. Like, yeah, I'll just jump on that question because, the deals that Spotify make with artists have just gotten worse and worse.
oh,
So for instance, one thing that recently kicked in is the fact that basically if you don't reach a certain threshold of plays, you don't even get like anything, like any amount of money. And instead, that money basically gets pooled and then redistributed to artists who are on like major labels, who y- are who don't necessarily need the money. It's a really complicated issue. I'll just say I was getting a little too much into the weeds, but the streaming services are designed, uh, and they made their initial deals with the record companies in ways that favored the record companies first and foremost,
mm,
as well as like the artists that are on those labels, on the major labels, and so it really puts independent artists in an incredibly weak financial position. Weak as
mm,
in they don't get any money if they don't rise to the level of, you know, uh, X number of streams, which is a drop in the bucket for a major label, but can actually be a significant amount of potential income that these indie artists aren't getting anymore because of the way those deals are set.
I've even heard Snoop Dogg saying things like, now he was sharing revenue with other people, but basically had 1 billion spins and got $40,000 for it.
Yeah.
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 I mean, yeah, so the it's set up to disempower independent artists, and it's an irony because this very same technology that has enabled independent artists to be able to be heard in ways
Mhm.
that they couldn't be heard when we're under a music distribution system that was brick and mortar stores and vinyl LPs or CDs and cassette tapes. Uh, you know, uh, that was an unfair system for a lot of independent artists also. And there was a kind of utopian, you know, uh, there is an air of utopianism in the early days of the internet that, oh, this is finally going to allow independent artists to be able to
Mhm.
make a living. But the industries quickly figured out ways to make that not happen. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And I think the same is obviously for films, independent
Hmm.
filmmakers. They
Hmm.
disappear into Netflix. They disappear. They're not getting pretty much never getting the money back. You know.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I know Copyright Criminals is popped up on Netflix and Amazon
Hmm.
Prime and Canopy. I don't even understand how that happens. Honestly, I need to probably be a better business person, but instead I'm the chair of a communication studies department at the University of Iowa. I don't have enough time in the day to figure this out. But yeah, I've never received like a dime from any of the streams that Copyright Criminals has gotten.
About the deep fake, like who, if they would steal, somebody would steal my look, my face, and they will do something with it or whatever. Do I own How does that work? Like, can I sue them for using me, or it's just, I'm not a public figure. I'm just,
Yeah, exactly.
like,
So
yeah.
there's there are some privacy laws that could possibly apply to the use of deep fakes for, a private citizen. But I don't know. I don't have an answer for that side of things. What I will say is there's a thing called right of publicity law that protects celebrities.
Mhm.
And, you know, essentially, it protects celebrities from having their likenesses used without their permission for advertisements or, in the case of music deep fakes, like, you know, uh, Tupac's voice being used on a Drake song, Drake during the height of the his like the summer of 2024, battle with Kendrick Lamar.
Mm.
Uh, they were like Kendrick Lamar and Drake were like lobbying various songs, basically mixtape songs at each other, and they were like publishing them on the internet. And then they would eventually make their way to Spotify. One song that Drake did, um, to diss Kendrick Lamar, who's from like, LA, and because Tupac is associated with LA, Drake basically used AI technologies to mimic Tupac's voice, to diss Kendrick Lamar. And Tupac's estate. One thing that's interesting about right of publicity law is, it actually can last. It lasts beyond the death of the person. So the estates of Marilyn Monroe, the estates of
Mm.
famous long deceased people, still control via the right of publicity law. They control the use of the likenesses of those celebrities. And so, yeah, basically, you know, it was probably a combination of a copyright law and right of publicity law that was invoked by Tupac's estate that's got that Drake song that had the AI deep fake of Tupac taken down. So yeah, for a private citizen, maybe some elements of right of privacy law um, could protect you. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but where I think it's where it really applies to deep fakes is right of publicity law that would allow dead celebrities and their estates or living celebrities to prevent, an imitation of themselves appearing in a song or a
Mm.
video or whatever. Mhm.
Mm. Okay.
And one other thing that pertains to the internet is, well, people are saying, and, maybe things will adjust, but that, Los Angeles is going to become kind of a wasteland because of the internet
Mhm.
streamers.
I guess all I have to say about that is that Pandora's box has already been opened. So yeah, there's no way to go back to a time when basically commercial life wasn't organized around internet, and eventually now we're living in a streaming age. And so, of course, it hasn't surprised me that studios, the the entities that are yeah crafting these contracts and also trying to rewrite contracts are doing it in ways that empowers them and disempowers the talent, which is why there have been a couple major strikes in Hollywood over the past
Yeah.
couple of years.
What do you think's going to happen to,
Yeah.
human artists versus AI? But what's your deep down gut
Yeah, I mean,
feeling 10 years from
honestly,
now?
I'm optimistic. Like you know, I take a long view of things. So I also try and temper my optimism by as well taking a long view. For instance, you know, um, every time a new technology emerges, there's kind of celebratory rhetoric around the democratizing potential of X, Y, or Z.
Mm.
And so you can go back to newspaper articles written in the 19 teens about radio. Um, and you can basically replace radio with internet, and you're going to get the same kinds of utopian optimistic rhetoric surrounding how radio was going to completely reorganize social life and make things better and give people access to more information so that they can make better, wiser decisions in their political, choice of political candidates or whatever. So I take the long view to temper my optimism, but I also take the long view to remind myself to be optimistic that, we humans have been quite creative in our ability to, take these new technologies that we helped create, but then which also sort of take on a life of their own.
Uh,
And AI is a totally different ball of wax, and yet, I do feel like we can essentially coexist with it, uh,
mm,
in ways that will retain our humanity, for a lack
mm,
of a better term, and in ways that could potentially be really exciting. We were talking about how my students are walking around with phones in their pockets that are more powerful than recording studios
mm,
that Public Enemy recorded in the year 1988 when they recorded these classic albums, and other classic sample-based albums were created. And so, I just in my life, and also when I'm thinking about questions such as these, I retain this balance of optimism and tempered optimism by kind of looking at history and looking at the way that's we've like developed in our relationships with new technologies. So
mm.
I think I'll try and end on a positive note.
Yeah, I like that. That is a positive. I like that conclusion.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming and talking
Oh,
to
thanks for
us.
having me. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a great discussions. I really loved it.
Well, thanks again for your time and the great questions that you asked as well.
Yeah, thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you for watching or listening to The Internet is Crack. Tune in next week when we have another great conversation about robotics, AI, and the internet. You can watch us or listen to us on YouTube or Spotify or many other outlets. And don't forget to follow us on social media. See you next Monday.